Oh, today we look at 1 Kings chapters 10 and 11. And Solomon is king, and his fame for his wisdom and his understanding and his wealth and all of that are spreading throughout all of the region. Everybody is talking about the wisdom of Solomon. And the Queen of Sheba hears about that. And she comes to test him, it says, with hard questions. And he answers all of those questions, exactly right and completely. And it says her spirit is amazing. She's breathless with admiration for Solomon's wisdom and his understanding. And he put on the fancy feasts and, the food and everything, and his wealth, his properties, and everything of Solomon was very impressive to not only this queen, but queens and kings and other rulers of all the nations. And, her response when she has figured all of this out to him in verse 6, this report I heard was of your accomplishments and your wisdom, but I didn't believe them. And I came with my own eyes have seen, and no, not even half of what had been told to me. Everything, just even half of what I was told isn't enough. I just lavished the praise upon him and everything and all of everything that was going on. And she presented him with 120 talents of gold. And, yesterday I talked about, how many, a talent being 75 pounds and the value of one talent is like $5.5 million. And so this 120 talents of gold again is, almost $600 million. I mean, the wealth, I mean, it just boggles my mind, this amazing number. But, they use this gold for their glasses that they drank out of and for making the walls. I mean, today, gold, I mean, we have some gold rings and a little bit of gold plating, but most gold is just sitting in a vault as backing for money. We don't use a lot of gold for those kinds of things. And of course, if you do, they're super expensive, it says in here that silver was, inconsequential. They didn't even think about that because that wasn't really worth anything. But, and it's just, the way everything was, it just amazes me in so many ways. And then in verse 11, there's a little interlude, about Queen Sheba, because we had, 10 verses about her. And then verse 11 and 12 talks about the fleet of Hiram carrying the gold and everything that comes and that. And then verse 13, meanwhile, King Solomon has given Queen Sheba everything her heart desires. And of that, everything her heart desires includes an offspring. And, we'll read on and it'll say that, Solomon had wives, many princes, 700, I think it was, 700 princesses as wives. And I'm thinking, well, how can you even, that's just outrageous. But, this was one of the things that everybody was coming and this, the Queen of Sheba, the offspring that she and King Solomon later would have, would become the king there, of that land, of her land where she was. And so the reign of Solomon, continued in a different fashion that way as well. But, and it's just kind of one of those little asides in here that, but it's one of the things that happened. And society, it was so different and everything too. But anyway, and it's at verse 14, and then we go back to something different. The weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. And that, 666, that's kind of the sign of the devil, right? But it was 666 talents of gold. And it's just kind of one of those, here's another surprising thing. But in a way, it's also one of those reminders to me that Satan is always active in the world. And we're going to see that it's just playing out here in Solomon's time as well, and so that was, so that came in 666 talents of gold, beside that which came from traders and other merchants. So that wasn't all of the gold that way, it came, but I mean, so why it was specified, I think, must have been just to remind us of the devil's activity in the world at these areas, and so he was using this gold to make shields and his cup that he drank out of, and the throne had 6 steps that were covered in gold, and and all of this plushy, fancy stuff, and basically he's putting on a show for people, and I guess he had the wealth and everything to do that. And verse 23 says, King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought his presence to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his mind. So again, it's a reminder that, all of this is a gift from God. And everyone brought presents, silver, gold, garments, weapons, spices, and, the total amount of everything that was brought was just, unimaginable in for us. And then he had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses. And and of course, this is the king of a country, and 12,000 horses, when you got armies and everything, maybe it's not such a big deal. And, and 1,400 chariots, you got, you're protecting your borders and all this and that, but it's, the sheer numbers to think about that, to me, it's mind-boggling in so many ways. In verse 27, like I mentioned earlier, the king made silver as common as stones. Really? Silver's worth, $70, $75 an ounce right now. And, and to have that as common as stones. I look out in my gravel driveway and there's a lot of stones out there. And if I could go out there and pick up nuggets like that of silver, well, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Yeah. Well, it's not that way. And it says a chariot imported from Egypt was 600 shekels of silver. So, they weren't, I don't know how many shekels of silver compares to a talent of gold, but, a chariot was inexpensive compared to what the value of gold was. And then verse 11, chapter 11 rather, we're going to find, Solomon dies at the end of this, but this is the downfall of King Solomon. He is shown to us here in chapter 11. It says, he loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, the Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, Hittite women from nations concerning which God had said to the Israelites, you shall not marry or take them as wives. And Solomon didn't pay attention to those rules, that from God, and took women from all of those countries to be his wives. And, God said, you shall not marry, they will not be with you, for they will incline your hearts to their gods. And this is exactly what happened. That Solomon started building altars and for all of these other gods, and was going and offering sacrifices and worshiping these other gods. And there's quite a list of them. And of course, it says, verse 4, when Solomon was old. That's no excuse, right? When you're old, you should cling even more tightly to God and all of God's promises. That's, sometimes younger people will say, oh, I got time for that later. But as we get older, it's, we are a little bit more aware that, having this relationship with God is right relationship. And of course, that right relationship is only because of God. But, Pharaoh seemed to forget that. And when he got old, he was maybe more susceptible or so comfortable with his wisdom and his standing and everything that he began to forget who God is. And, in verse 6, he did evil in the sight of the Lord, did not come follow the Lord as his father David had done. And that was the second time in that chapter that, it had those words, he did not follow God as his father David did. And the Lord was angry with Solomon in verse 9 because his heart turned away. And God said to Solomon, and he talked to Solomon earlier twice, that Solomon had heard from God, and now again. So God says, because you have turned away, your sons will not have the dynasty, although there will be one of your sons who will rule one of the tribes of Israel. The others will be, separated again. So we have the divisions, Judah and Israel, the northern kingdom. We have that separation coming up. In verse 14, God the Lord raised up adversaries against Solomon, and it tells us about them and how they came to be his adversaries. And as we just read on the rest of the way through chapter 11, there are rebellions against Solomon, and the war is coming and the battle going on. And in verse 38, God says, Yet to his son I will give one tribe. He's saying this to Solomon, to your son I will give one tribe, but I'll take from you all that your reigns, and so God is making a promise to this son. And, he says, verse 39, for this reason I will punish the descendants of David, but not forever. So here's that promise of the coming Messiah. The promise of Jesus again comes to us way back here in this book of 1 Kings. And chapter 11 ends with the death of Solomon and with the hint of harder things coming ahead for the people of Israel.